Well, good afternoon, and welcome to our first afternoon session for our Engagement Scholarship Research Creative Activities Grants Program. And this is a program we're really happy about because we're able to provide funding, a lot of it's seed funding, to faculty members to conduct engaged scholarly projects. So today you're going to hear from the 2021 grantees. So they've had a year to complete their projects, and today we're excited to hear the results. Our first presenter is Lindsay Weiler. Lindsay Weiler is from the University of Minnesota, and the title of her project, Addressing Children's Mental Health via University-Community Partnerships.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I'm Lindsay Weiler. As Lynette mentioned, I'm from the University of Minnesota, and I am excited to share the outcomes of my grant project with you today. So we had 3 partners on this project, the University YMCA, which supports college students to engage in meaningful work with youth, some of it volunteer, some of it paid. The second partner was Ramsey County Children's Mental Health Collaborative, and they provide support to children and families in the area of mental health. And then the University of Minnesota, which is where I am situated. The problem that we were hoping to tackle, or at least begin to tackle, is adolescent mental health. So many teens, as we know, are experiencing mental health challenges, and even after accessing outpatient services, which is a separate challenge, their mental health challenges often persist unnecessarily. And there's a couple of reasons why this might happen. It could be logistical challenges that they need to overcome to access therapy. It could be having few facilitated opportunities to take what they're learning in therapy and generalize it to other settings. So there's a real need for supplemental services for young people. And one potential solution, which is the focus of our project, is to engage mentors in the process of mentoring. And so mentoring-based models can help fill the gap by supporting the work that clinicians do. So for example, providing emotion coaching to support teens. The mentors could also provide logistical support, like actual rides to and from therapy appointments. And there's been a lot of discussion in the literature about the potential benefits of these paraprofessionals, of specially trained mental health mentors. But we know essentially nothing about the perceived need or acceptability of them within the communities that they operate. So as you could probably imagine, those were our objectives. We wanted to determine the need for supplemental mental health services for adolescents that were in outpatient care. And we wanted to examine the acceptability of a mentoring intervention where college students would serve as mentors to teens to supplement the formal services that they were already receiving. So we spoke to several key stakeholders: teens in outpatient care, their caregivers. We spoke to mental health clinicians, and we spoke to college students who could serve as mentors in this type of model. We asked them open-ended questions about need and acceptability, and we used thematic analysis to identify some themes. There's a lot of good information that we learned from the focus groups. I'm going to highlight just a few. First, across all the groups, there was a perception of high need for this type of the program. Everybody talked about outpatient therapy not being enough, and some of the adolescents talked about hiding things from their therapist or withholding information. And they thought that if they had a younger person, a more kind of traditionally aged college student mentor, that they may share those things with them. Most participants liked the program idea and wanted to participate. Clinicians highlighted that this is an opportunity to fill demographic gaps that sometimes we see between clinicians and clients. And college students expressed a real need for quality training and supervision. They had some concerns about handling crisis and mandated reporting. So in the end, I think our conclusion for now is that this type of program that's led by specially trained mentors is needed and would be well received if we were to implement it with some of the recommendations that we learned in the focus groups. So our next steps are to start development of the program model and then eventually do pilot testing. So the ESC grant was really instrumental in us setting the stage and establishing the evidence we needed to move forward. So there's my contact information if anybody has comments or questions, and I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lindsay. Our next presenter is Socorro Morales from the University of Texas at San Antonio, and she's going to talk about Latinx youth empowerment through ethnic studies, developing critical youth educators and anti-racist advocates.
Thank you so much, Lynette, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here and sharing space with us. So I'm going to be talking today about my project with Latinx youth and sort of what we came up with and what we found. So a little bit of context of the study. There's an organization here in San Antonio known as Martinez Street, who actually just went through a name change. And one of their goals is to basically work with young people across a range of areas, including education, but also mental health and wellness and other things like that. And so they wanted to partner, they were seeking to partner with somebody who could teach them and work through them doing YPAR, which is Youth Participatory Action Research. And given that that is an area that I have familiarity and expertise on, that's kind of how we ended up coming together, but specifically around the nonprofit organization's focus on education. And so sort of stepping back a bit from what the organization wanted, right? We understood that the educational disparities that young people face are really tied to these like historical and social and political aspects of education that affect, accessibility, that affect culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy and things of that nature. And so ethnic studies is one example of an intervention that can sort of interrupt that type of schooling, right? It engages young people. It allows them to talk about what's happening in their daily lives in a way that is familiar, right? And also sort of really speaking to their lived realities. So the project goals were to collaborate, right, with this nonprofits in providing critical programming, specifically around ethnic studies-based curriculum, as well as using that as an opportunity to sort of bring students into, greater participation with the stipends, right? Because with COVID and all the things that have kind of been disrupting student participation, getting students to kind of show up, right, as opposed to like choosing to work or do something else was difficult. So that was sort of one of the shared goals. But the other goal I think that was also important, both to the organization as well as myself, is highlighting how youth voice can have a role within educational leadership, which is my area. And in reality, working with a lot of K-12 administrators, principals and teachers, they often don't think about young people as having much critique or analysis of the school system. So that was also very important. So the research questions were, how does MAS, which is Mexican American Studies, right, a subset of ethnic studies, impact the understandings that Latinx youth have of educational inequity? And what tools does MAS offer Latinx youth who are developing their lenses as anti-racist advocates, right? Like, what does it mean for them to bring these things into question? A bit of the study parameters. So the participants were Empower House staff and then students and folks who were with Empower House. And in this case, it was a small group of 5 young girls of color. It was throughout the academic year, and we would meet every week or every 2 weeks, about 2 hours each meeting. Some of the overarching topics that we addressed were racism, classism, sexism, which are in line with ethnic studies-based curriculum. Some of the challenges that we face were that there was a lot of staff and organizational changes, and there was a lot of closures due to COVID, right? And so that certainly played a role in how we kind of structured our time together and like, what did that mean to kind of go through the school year? And in addition to that, as y'all are probably aware and familiar, the Uvalde school shooting happened. We're just about 99 minutes out from that place, right? And that also happened at the end of the school year as well. And so there's a lot of things happening for these young folks. But one of the things that came about, right, and some of the things that we kind of explored were this idea of counter stories and the dangers of a single story, right? And so when we're thinking about education for these young people and what does it mean for them to engage in ethnic studies, a lot of the comments and stuff that I hear typically from these ed leaders are that they are not going to understand, that they don't really know what any of that means, right? And yet these students kind of illustrated throughout that academic year that they do understand what it means to live, for example, in a certain part of town, which is one of the things that we talked about, and then who goes to that school when you live in that particular part of town. So what I have here is an example, actually a curricular example, which was also something that I kind of shared with Empower House, right, for them to have, but an example of a curriculum project, something you can do with them. And so when we talk about this idea of the danger of a single story, we kind of deconstruct it to really focus on what could be the danger of a single story about themselves or their community, and how might they challenge that story, right? And so I have a very, I meant to flip this, but young people wanted and needed a space to discuss these issues. I think ethnic studies has shown us that, and ethnic studies is effective in engaging them in conversations about themselves and their identities. I do have a very quick little snippet in relationship to this conversation about where they live and what does it mean to live where they live. And this is a student who's reflecting on that particular question in terms of where they live and dynamics of race and class. Let me just make sure that I'm sharing sound. Apologize.
I had this whole debate with my friend. Because so growing up, like where I grew up, it was like southeast, like it was nearby here, you know. People would be like, oh, like the ghetto and stuff like that. And then my friend was like, no, the west side is the ghetto. And there's like this whole like argument. I don't know.
Like
the
debate?
North side, yeah, being like rich people, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of like La Cantera and stuff like that, like I never even heard of that place until one of my friends that I go to school with invited me to go with her there, and I was like, fancy.
So that's just an example of the kinds of things that I'm also sharing with my educational leaders in terms of hearing that youth voice, right, and understanding that sensibility that they have about their education and who they are. So, oops, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing the words, the voices of the participants. Our next presenter is going to be Leslie Harris from the University of Louisville. And her presentation is The Promise, Arts-Based Socially Engaged Research Exploring the Impact of Race-Based Trauma and Gun Violence in Louisville.
Thank you so much, Lynette. And I'm very excited to show our team's work and also some recent press that we have gotten locally and some national press, which I will get to in a minute because it involves our community days that one is happening this weekend as well. So I just want to first introduce our team, and we have Dr. Maurice Gaddis from Virginia Commonwealth University, who's a social worker, Dr. Emma Starrett-Hong, who's a clinical psychologist, myself, a social worker at the University of Louisville, Roberto Vinsani, who is an artist that we work with at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, Toya Northington, this project was very much her conceptualization, and she is very much the leader at the Speed Art Museum, Dr. Jelani Kerr, who's in the School of Public Health, and Dr. Gabriel Jones, who's in the School of Public Health. And I also just want to underscore the fact that my work on this project was very much behind the scenes in terms of finding funding for this brilliant project, in terms of really organizing a lot in terms of the arts-based research approach and methodology, but I in no way really represent the lived experiences of the people who are a part of this research team or the participants we worked with. So I'm going to read today kind of a collective statement that the research team has written about this work. So many of you know that the killings of unarmed Black people by state actors has led to activism and demands for social change. We are all from Louisville. We all live in Louisville, so except for Roberto, but In the wake of Breonna Taylor's murder in the March of 2020, the Speed Art Museum and the University of Louisville brought together a steering committee led by Breonna Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, and formed a research committee of Black scholars and arts-based researchers to develop an exhibition entitled Promise, Witness, Remembrance. And you can see the beautiful Amy Sherrill piece on the right-hand side that was featured in that. So Promise, Witness, Remembrance was an exhibition honoring the life and legacy of Breonna Taylor. And this research team also did a photo voice exhibition, which you can see on the lower bottom of the screen, where that was called It Could Have Been Mead, which featured the community's response and reaction through protests. And what was found through that is that collective healing, in which members of the Black community come together for mutual support, validation, upliftment, has been advocated as a trauma recovery practice. So carrying this idea forward, the Speed Art Museum and the University of Louisville have decided to do 3 years of exhibition. The first one's the Promise, the second year is the Witness, the last year is the Remembrance. So now we are on the Promise, which is what we received ESC funding for. So the Promise aims to understand the lived experience of African Americans in Louisville who have experienced racism and gun violence, with the potential for empowerment, social justice action, and arts-based healing. So the Promise began with 12 weeks of workshops in which 9 participants made artwork with donated guns, metal, and various materials, and engaged in photo voice methods led by the fine artist and professor we worked with, Roberto Vinsani. So Roberto is an interdisciplinary multimedia artist who resides in Brooklyn, New York, and specializes in installation, sculpture, music, and performance. He seeks to memorialize and honor victims of police violence, pointing towards recent transgressions and elevating the stories of specific individuals to combat historical amnesia. In addition, his art is intended to prompt its participants to engage in the act of memorialization while opening up questions about collective and individual accountability to racial equity and justice. So embedded in these 12 weeks of workshops was the facilitation of critical conversations around grief, gun violence, racial healing, based on Christina Sharp's book entitled In the Wake on Blackness and Being. The framework for these conversations centered around wake work as labor within the space of paradoxes surrounding Black citizenship, identity, and civil rights. So our studies methodology includes several different parts. Of course, we used a community-based participatory action approach and engaged 9 participants. The Promise program was 12 weeks. Roberto and Toya worked together to develop a curriculum, including sensory activities and lessons on art making and strategies around using guns as art. We also embedded history of firearms within Black communities, rooting back to, the Pan-African slave trade. There were studio art sessions for art making, both at the Speed Art Museum studio and a local foundry, which I'll get to in a minute. All along the way throughout these sessions, the research team was engaging in critical conversations, which were recorded in terms of qualitative analysis, examining arts, and we had several arts-based focus groups. We also included a pre and post program survey where we included measures on racial and ethnic discrimination, race-based trauma, collective identification. And our clinical psychologist, Dr. Emma Sterrett-Hong, really wanted to include some weekly pre-post sessions on emotional state. She was really curious to know if these arts-based sessions really improved one's emotional states or what they really did to people, to really understand if there was potential for arts-based research to be connected to healing. So we used constructivist grounded theory analysis techniques and looked at some descriptive statistics. I'm just going to pull up our qualitative findings, but I'm going to walk you through a little bit of our results from the surveys as well. So in terms of our pre-post session measurements of participants' emotional states, during week 1, the average mood of participants decreased. And then throughout that session, still after that, the average emotional state increased throughout the sessions for most weeks. For 2 weeks, it was essentially the same pre-post session. Of course, since this is a pilot study with a small sample size, we examined changes to see if they were in the expected direction, not for statistical significance. However, surprisingly, in week 3, which was really focused on the history of guns within African-American community, there was an increased mood that was statistically significant. So these are some of the findings which we integrated into our arts-based exhibition. So this program culminated in several public art advocacy exhibitions. So some of them took place at the Falls Art Foundry, which is where we did a public exhibition on the iron casting process, which we used with melted gunmetal that had been collected through a gun drive. In addition, the public was invited to create their own cast iron art by purchasing a scratch block, which was carved out and then cast to pour, which you can see in the images. We also had our exhibition opening at the Speed Art Museum in August. And since then, we've had various panels. So one was based on the concept of Afrofuturism, entitled There Are Black Artists in the Future, which we actually brought back several people from the Promise Witness Remembrance exhibition a year later to talk about the impact of that work and carrying it forward to this work. We also had intimate discussions about the making of the Promise. And this weekend, we're having a community day that we are also engaging the community at the Speed Art Museum to not only look at the art advocacy exhibition, which you can see some of the art embedded above, but also having, fair food trucks, music, yoga, meditation, and a panel discussion from a lot of the artists that created this work and a lot of the youth violence activists around town that are coming in to talk about that event too. So in conclusion, for more information, we are currently up right now on the Speed Art Museum's website, and we also have a link to some media. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful to see this arts-based approach to research. Our next presenter is Deborah Tyndall from East Carolina University. School Connectedness, Supporting the Emotional and/or Mental Health of Adolescents in a Low-Income Middle School is her project. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Overby. I am with the College of Nursing, and we had an opportunity due to funding from ESC to really look at this topic through the lens of school connectedness. So sorry, I'm trying to. Our community partner is Toys Not Middle School, which is a Title I funded school in rural North Carolina. There are about 4,000 students that attend this school, and 83% of the student population is underrepresented youth. And we've had a partnership with this school for 3 years, and I've been working with the Wilson County School District for a decade. So we have a long history of partnership. Phase 2 of the research is what was funded with this grant. And we went in phase 2 and we were collecting additional data to expand on the research that we did in phase 1. But in phase 2, we wanted to look at data from students. In particular, we wanted to do survey collection on their perception of school connectedness and their help-seeking attitudes. So basically, if kids feel more connected to the school, are they more likely to seek help if they're in a situation where they really need assistance for like mental health issues. We also followed up after the surveys with the students and did focus groups, and this was to help us have a better understanding So we did like an exploratory or an explanatory design mixed methods with the focus groups. With the teachers and staff, we did semi-structured interviews, and we were really looking at teacher practice related to what they are doing in the classroom to connect with students. And in phase one, we had helped to support emotional poverty training. And so in phase two, we were really looking at whether or not it changed teacher practice. So we started last August with open house. We had 3 open houses, or we attended 3 at the school. And we were really excited because people were excited to be back in the schools, and, you know, parents were excited that their kids were back in school, and we really had a big turnout and a big interest in our study. And I believe we ended up getting about 110 participants. We got consents from parents and students that night. And so that was about a 25% response rate. So we were really excited about that. They were extremely excited and engaged. So that was a really good recruitment strategy that we used. And so in the spring, we did the teacher interviews and the student focus groups. So this is just a slide showing where we are. I mean, we just finished data collection in mid-April. So we've been analyzing a lot of our data. And on the left side of the screen, you can see where our student data sources are coming in with our surveys and our focus groups. And on the right side, you'll see that we had interviews with teachers and support staff. And one of the things with this school is that they have suffered from high teacher turnover rates over the past few years, with every year about 30 to 35% of turnover. And so we weren't able to get as many interviews as we would have liked, because there weren't that many teachers left that had the emotional poverty training in early 2021. So we, I believe, got 11 out of maybe 14 possible interviews with teachers and staff. So we're still working on this analysis. One of the things that I'll just share, that some preliminary findings and what we're seeing, is that teacher turnover has definitely impacted how students feel about being connected with the school. And teacher strategies in the classroom are very influential on whether or not the students feel connected. And one of those strategies is, you know, fair and equitable treatment of the students. So this fall, we're working on mixing the 3 data sources, and, you know, looking for convergent and divergent findings. So hopefully we will finish our analysis this fall. One of the things I think that's most significant about our project is that in the middle of data collection in April, when we were winding up the project, the district announced that they were closing the school. And it really, I mean, we were right in the middle of data collection. And so, you know, it really had an impact on teachers, on students, on our partners, and us as researchers, because we were developing this partnership and now it was coming to an end. So we had to quickly, you know, decide how we were going to close out this partnership. And so we decided to do a give get grid activity, where we evaluated the project outcomes and what we got out of the partnership. And so we had an activity in June, and we share our findings from this activity. We have a poster here at the conference, so please stop by and take a look at that. But I guess our next steps, we will disseminate what we've learned from this year and from this partnership through some presentations and publications. But thank you all for letting me share today our project.
Thank you so much. As working in the communities can be a little messy, but important, and important for us to apply our disciplinary knowledge with the assets in the community. Our next presenter is Tracy Ryder from North Carolina State University. She's presenting Aligning Health and built environment assessment frameworks in affordable housing.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you all see my screen okay? Great. So I am at the College of Design, North Carolina State University, and my research interest is really about the built environment and how it inadvertently or purposefully can impact our health and well-being. So the built environment is associated with both physical activity behaviors and health outcomes, such as obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancers. And these associations span environments where we live, work, play, and learn, all of which are designed. We spend 90% of our time inside buildings. This project seeks to build on ongoing research around a community-based assessment to optimize community development, health behaviors, and outcomes for an under-resourced Raleigh neighborhood. By looking at a unique joint elementary school and YMCA environment through the lenses of public health and the built environment, using a post-occupancy evaluation framework, which we see in architecture, as well as health impact assessment frameworks, which we see in public health, our partnership has established a mutual interest of understanding how this type of facility may impact the health of residents of an adjacent affordable housing development. The Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion notes that understanding the relationship between how population groups experience place and the impact of that place on health is fundamental to the social determinants of health, including both social and physical determinants. Previous funding through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program has supported exploring the health impacts of this particular joint facility on staff, students, and families. Oh, went backwards. Sorry. But this current project extends this previous research project, identified as an interest of the community and stakeholders, to explore differences between adjacent affordable housing residents with immediate access to this facility versus a matched affordable housing project 3 miles away without immediate access to a similar facility. So the research question for this proposal is, how does the hybrid YMCA elementary school and associated programming support the well-being of adjacent affordable housing residents compared to affordable housing residents a few miles away? So you can see on our little map there that the Beacon Ridge is the Case apartment complex, and Washington Terrace is the one that is farther north, about 3 miles away. They're managed by the same group, and the only real difference is their location and their proximity to the case study building of the Y and the elementary school. The Southeast Raleigh Promise is one of 19 purpose-built communities in the U.S. and is a primary partner in the Robert Wood Johnson funded project. Purpose-built communities work with defined neighborhoods as a community quarterback organization to approach community development holistically with a focus on housing, cradle to college education, and community wellness from a holistic perspective. Most communities also include a beacon site. In Southeast Raleigh, the primary beacon site is this joint YMCA elementary school, which you can see in the background, as well as the multifamily residence, which you'll see in the foreground of that picture, with adjacent park space, including paved trails, basketball courts, playgrounds, and open space, which is open to the school, the residents, and the community at large. The affordable housing developer, DHIC, is a Raleigh-based organization that is also a strategic partner in the Southeast Raleigh Beacon site and advisor to the Robert Wood Johnson project. As a developer and operator of many affordable housing developments in the Triangle, they had a very comparable sites available for exploration and are invested in understanding how the residents experience their housing communities. And they were serving as the gatekeeper to our population. So a series of stakeholder sessions were held to identify the previously stated research questions, allowing the community that we were serving to actually help formulate those research questions, and review opportunities for data gathering and analysis, as well as looking at our objectives, our resources, our roles, and our responsibilities in light of this ongoing COVID pandemic. Data collected included surveys of parents at the school, online interviews with parents and staff, and observation of the open play areas for both the residences and the school. Unfortunately, the Great Resignation was also felt by the partners of this project, and both our community partners lost their leadership in the early 2022 year. And it has taken time for them to rebuild their staffs and their capacity to engage meaningfully in such extensive engagement work. While we do have some preliminary findings, we're working with the leadership to gather more in-depth data through surveys and community engagement events this fall, now that they've staffed back up and have begun to rebalance their workloads. Regardless, we do have some preliminary findings. Our initial data indicates that an intentionally designed built environment can have an increased beneficial impact on community development, learning, and community health by developing a sense of belonging and supported social connection through strategically designed spaces that support engaged and health supportive programming, both in the school, the community center, the Y, the outdoor community spaces, and the residents' developments. Design strategies can be based on and further developed into guidelines for such communities by exploring some of the health promotive design features mentioned by respondents, including walking paths, community teaching kitchens, and meditation spaces. And barriers to health equity in the built environment can be environments that fail to promote a sense of belonging or being designed, constructed, and maintained as usual. Often we'll see the barriers are actually just working and going through the design and construction process as we have done, and not intentionally thinking about the mental and emotional impacts that the walls we build and the spaces that we design can have an impact. So given these initial results, we're looking forward to digging deeper into this comparative case study this fall and have plans for policy documents for both affordable housing and schools, research, publications, community engagement sessions at the school as they have events in the fall, and some of the community engagement sessions that they host at the affordable housing communities. So that's what we've got. And there's my contact information if you need it. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Tracy. Really interesting, and I love hearing all the ways you're going to disseminate this information in both academic and community settings. So thank you very much. Our final presenter is Tracy Hodges of the University of Alabama. She'll present a collaborative professional development partnership focused on resetting writing goals and working to eliminate inequities post-COVID-19.
All right, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Dr. Tracy Hodges, and I'm very excited to present this project. This has been a long-term collaboration between the University of Alabama and Hale County Middle School, which is a rural middle school that initially came to the university wanting assistance with improving literacy outcomes. And so this project has done wonders for helping focus those goals and really helping the teachers and the students. And so for this grant, we really had 4 goals. We already had an ongoing partnership and we'd already created a lot of good work, but now we wanted to center our work on what is going to help the students post-COVID-19. So there were 4 components that we initially proposed, and then 1 component that kind of developed as we went along. And that was, first, we had an interactive book club study that took place over 2 semesters. One semester we read 1 book, and the other semester we read another book. And I worked through this with the teachers worked in collaboration, and from this they built strategies that were really going to help benefit their students. The second is we did what we called planning period meetings, where the researcher went in and worked with teachers in their classrooms and also individually to meet whatever goals they had. So a lot of this was, how do we plan better lessons? How do we have goals that lead towards the greater curriculum, and also brainstorming the small day-to-day things that were happening with the students. For example, during the month of October last year, the teachers experienced a lot of need for collaboration because of TikTok challenges and how that was impacting their students and what the students were doing that maybe was not negatively or not positively benefiting them. And then the third objective is that we did classroom observations with teachers, provided coaching and feedback. And then we also did this in the summer as well as the semesters, had professional development that was focused on the teachers' goals. And all of this was really around the greater theme of improving students' writing and helping them become more engaged and more active writers, but also focusing on how reading impacts their writing as well, which we know COVID was greatly impacted by these skills because students were largely on the computer and they weren't getting immediate feedback on their writing, which we have found is very important for students to improve. So students would write, they would submit work, and it might be a couple of hours or a few days before they got feedback, as opposed to being in the classroom all the time when they saw it kind of immediately. So we were really trying to work to overcome some of those obstacles that presented themselves. And here you see some pictures of the teachers working in their library as part of the grant. And then as the project developed, some of the things that we saw happen was one of their goals kind of shifted. And we knew that the students and the teachers were wanting to focus on writing. Here I have the two books that we read as part of our book study. The first is Growing Language and Literacy Strategies for English Learners. This really helped focus on a population of the students that really didn't get focused on as much. And there were so many great strategies in this book. The teachers absolutely loved it, and we got to see how they implemented it. The second is Why Do I Have to Read This? And this book very aptly talks about masks that students wear, such as being the class clown or being the student who avoids assignments, and really dissecting why that is. From these goals, one of the issues that students consistently told us was that the library did not have very many books for them. And they were seeing a connection between reading great writers and then producing great writing themselves. And this library, as kind of a backstory, actually was created after weeding, which is when the librarians go and take books off the shelves, weeding from 3 other libraries, which then donated their books to this one. So you can imagine the books in this library were not the best ones or the most exciting ones for the students. So a large portion of the grant funds had been set aside for resources for the school and for resources for the teachers. And everyone agreed that the best use of that would be to purchase books for the school. This is a stack of 142 books that were bought for the school library. We ended up with the grant being able to donate over 500 books. Most of these are brand new titles. They're books the kids are excited about. They included graphic novels, as well as novels in verse, as well as reimaginings of classics like the Anne of Green Gables series and the Babysitter's Club and all those R.L. Stein books. And the kids have been just eating them up. It has been everything we have wanted. Engagement has increased, and the students are loving checking out those new books. And the teachers are working to integrate those into their writing lessons so that students do get to be more engaged, active, and creative writers. So we are so thankful for the grant, for all that it allowed us to do in accomplishing these 4 goals, as well as this new goal that was created through our collaboration and through our ongoing partnership. And that partnership is now entering year 6 and continuing this year as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your work, and I love hearing that the children are enjoying the books that were purchased. So now I'm going to ask everyone, all of our presenters, to turn their cameras on, and we will have a few questions that I have already sent to everybody to think about. But I want to, and anybody can answer, because we want to make sure that this grant is making a difference, right? So, we have a certain budget, and we want to make sure that, that the small grant, because that's about all we can do at this point, is helping. And so this will help us to help more of our faculty. So the first question is, how does this grant support your ability to conduct engaged scholarship at your university? Anyone can answer that.
Well, I think just from my perspective, like being able to, because at least in the organization that I work with, one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's indicative of the city and the context that I'm in, but San Antonio is a very poor city, right? And so there's always a pull between a person, like a student that has to work, or a student that can come and get a stipend and participate in other kinds of activities. And I think that's always a big challenge, and it's been a big challenge for this organization. And so being able to utilize the funds for stipends specifically in the way that I wanted to use it without the university like getting too wild about what that looks like, I think was really helpful and really speaking to the need for what that organization was looking for, right? Which we know a lot of nonprofits don't have the funds to do that. And so that I think was one of the ways that it allowed me to work with them, but specifically for that need of like, how do we bring students in, right? Because they're competing right now between the programming that we're doing and perhaps like a job that they have to do. And so I think that was, especially with COVID and all that, I think that was extremely helpful. But I think the university doesn't always like see the need for that specific stipend, right? And the funding for these young folks. And so that was definitely something that was helpful.
Thank you, Sakura. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Tracy?
To kind of extend what Sakura was saying, one of the best things that this grant has done is that it allowed work in a smaller school and with a smaller group of participants. A lot of times in research, we think of helping the masses, which of course is wonderful, but sometimes making a big difference in a small space can have implications that we take forward. And so this grant really allowed us to dig deep and to really focus our energies on one place, and then to be able to present those results and then think about how that might extend to a larger district or to a larger school. And I'm personally very thankful for that, because I can see the importance of that work, but it's not, as Sakura said, always honored by some of the bigger agencies or agencies that have a lot more funding to give. And so it's a small amount of money for a small group of people that makes a big difference, which is what more could you ask for?
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Leslie?
Sure, yes. So I had already been working with this group of researchers the year prior to the call for proposals. And one of the things that we were sort of running up against is, doing arts-based research, especially at the, using materials like melted gunmetal and renting space for a foundry and bringing together all these, people and consultants and artists and activists. Like, it's really expensive, and it often goes in a direction that is unanticipated. So one of the things that we really appreciated about the ability to apply for the ESC funding is that your entity was really interested in, like participatory action research, but also the application was not so clear cut in terms of like, you need to understand the outcomes of this project prior to even beginning, because we didn't really understand how this was really going to change and evolve over time, because that was really based on feedback and iteration from our participants and community partners. So that kind of application was really great, because not a lot of funders write their applications like that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that feedback. That's really helpful. So maybe we'll go into another one. How did this grant support your ability to co-create projects with your community partners? Co-creating, rather than the researcher putting it on the community.
I could start. So ours is a follow-up on our larger Robert Wood Johnson, which the intent of that project was to try and figure out how the built environment of this one facility was impacting not just the students and the staff and the families, but the community at large. But we didn't really have the capacity within that project to extend to the larger community. So for us to get into the community was going to be the parents and people that came to the Y. But what we really wanted to do after talking with these stakeholders is get to this affordable housing complex that's right across the parking lot and see how they were engaging and how it could compare to others that didn't have access to this facility. And so this was like the perfect kind of funding structure and opportunity and amount of money for us to, get with that group and kind of co-create those questions for the survey and the questions around, how do you use the space when you're outside? And do you need more, emotional support space, or do you need meditation circles? Or what is it that you like really kind of understand the elements that we could ask about that would address their questions from their perspective, like actual community-based research. So this was kind of like the perfect co-creation of how we ask the questions and how we gather the data with the community.
Thank you. Anyone else want to? Deborah, thank you.
And I know for our project, it was very important to engage the parents, because they were like the gatekeepers, because they had to sign consents for their student to participate. So the funding really helped us with like the open house activities. you know, it's small things, like we had goodie bags for the students. And our strategy was, well, if we can get the kids to the table, then we can say, who's here with you tonight? Is your mom here? Is your dad here? Tell them to come over. We want to talk to them. So it was, we had to figure out strategy to engage the parents. And so, you know, even though it's a small amount of funding, we used it to, you know, for things that we thought were going to help. You know, we had this strategy in place, and little things like a goodie bag that'll get the attention of a teenager was our strategy to engage the larger stakeholder, which was the parents. And they were, you know, and you know, most of the time when you get them to your table, you can talk to them and engage them with your project, but it's getting them there. You got to get them over there first. So that was one of the crucial things that I think that was made our project successful, is just being able to engage the parents when they were on campus that night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know if any audience members had any questions. If you have any, I'll just check the chat to make sure. Okay. Yeah. But I do want to, again, thank you all for taking on this project, these projects. They're, you know, like we said, a small amount of money, but can make a big difference. And also, I hope to serve as seed money for you to build on as you continue this important work. The next session is going to, you will have to leave this session and sign into the next. So you are half of our cohort. The other half will begin at 3:20. And that's for our audience as well. If you'd like to hear the second group of these wonderful engaged scholars, you will have to leave this session. We'll close this session, and then you will sign in to the next. And I believe it's in the chat, the link that will start the 3:20 session if you want to copy that link. But it's also in your agenda for the Engaged Scholarship Consortium. So thank you all again. If you want to send me any notes about how you're doing, I'd love to hear it. And I will ask for a final report in December. So I'll send you some information about that as well. And thank you, audience members, for coming and supporting our researchers. Thank you all. See you in 20 minutes.